is power training or power needed for raw powerlifting? No. Now there's one major reason why that is, and it's called the force-velocity relationship. Now this is some basic muscular physiology, and what this involves is the idea that you can produce a lot of velocity with the muscle and you can also produce a lot of force, but you can't do both. You can produce a bit of force and quite a bit of velocity, and that is what power is, force over time. But with the main goal of powerlifting is to lift as much weight as you possibly can, so that requires the right hand side of the graph, which is producing maximal force. So there's no real point in doing power training, because you need to actually produce lots of force, not lots of power. Now I could just end this video here, but there are a couple of critiques that some people would make, particularly of those Westside and Conjugate fanboys, so I'll address those. Now somebody would say, well, Westside used it and they have some of the strongest powerlifters. Well, if you give a tank an extra shunt and you say, well, look at all that extra power and force it could produce because we added that shunt on it, that's what Westside Barbell was like. The people who performed under Louis Simmons' training methodologies were already absolute monsters and very strong people. Whether it was optimal or not, they were going to be really strong guys. Secondly, those guys were doing multiply powerlifting, which is a whole different kettle of fish compared to raw powerlifting. Now some people will be like, what about raw powerlifting? Like Pete Rubish, who explode off the floor. They have a lot of power off the floor of their deadlifts, and look at him, he can deadlift 900 pounds. Well, what you've got to understand again is more basic muscle physiology and biomechanics. And muscle is not producing the same amount of force throughout the whole 1 rep max attempts that you perform. Now what I mean by that is that through the deadlift there's different points of difficulty depending on people's biomechanics and leverages. So Pete Rubish, he can be in a very strong position off the floor, so he can essentially explode off the floor. He's not exerting 100% of his muscle force producing capabilities off the floor, but when he comes near to his lockout, you see that the weight moves very slowly because he's at that end of the spectrum of the force-velocity relationship, and that's due to things like moment arm changes within the lift. So if you have a longer moment arm, it's hard to overcome the torque that produces. And secondly, the length tension relationship. If a muscle is very lengthened, then it can't produce as much active force. So that's why powerlifting is very dynamic in terms of the speeds of the lift. You have the sticking points where the most amount of force has to be produced. People are gonna think I hate power training or the characteristics of power training. For powerlifting, there are a couple of useful things for it. So the idea of performing a specific powerlifting movement with a lower intensity and with fairly low reps can actually have many other benefits than power production. Firstly, you're refining your technique without accumulating much fatigue, and secondly, it can actually induce small amounts of hypertrophy. This study showed here that somebody who did 30% for 90% rep range, that might be quite hard to get your head around at first, but it's like 30% for 5 reps or so of the 1 rep max, and actually had some marked increases in muscle protein synthesis. So you can actually build muscle with very light weights and without accumulating too much fatigue, so you're going to keep the neural efficiency there, and overall that might help. But doing isolated power work just to increase power for powerlifting is not the most productive thing. So that's all for that topic. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you later.